Welcome back. We have another book review for you today. We're looking at Strange Rites, New Religions for a Godless World by Isabella Burton. It's a fascinating and well-written book, but I do have a reader beware before we get into it. This book is strange. It lives up to its name. It deals with practices that at one point would have been marginal, would have been maybe considered deviant, that are now becoming mainstream. And so it talks about things like witchcraft and polyamory and bondage and all these sorts of things that if you're squeamish or if you don't like being uncomfortable, you'll probably be uncomfortable. In particular, she likes to start with the most extreme examples of something and then pull back to say, all right, maybe that is extreme, but really this underlying principle or belief is shared by a lot of people. And so sometimes our opening examples, you're like, wow. So if that throws you off, it might not be the book for you, but it is a really fascinating book. Burton is looking at the current state of religion in America. This is a nice blend of history and contemporary analysis. She's looking at a new category that she's kind of coining. It comes from some different research, but she's looking at what she calls the remixed. Those are people who would have checked none on any religious survey. They have no religious affiliation. The people who would check spiritual but not religious. So she calls them SBNR, spiritual but not religious. But also those who check a box that they're Christian or they're Buddhist or they're Muslim or Jewish, whatever religion, but they also borrow lots of practices from other religions. They're remixed. And she estimates, using the data, that somewhere over 50% of Americans are some version of remixed, whether they're nuns, spiritually not religious, or they're borrowing from lots of different traditions. And it goes higher the younger they are. So millennials are way higher than Gen X and boomers, and Gen Z is extremely high on the remixed factor. So remixed, she's talking about people who will kind of curate their own religion, their own spirituality. So they may use prayer beads, but they also do Buddhist meditation. They also believe in astrology and reincarnation, and they've gone to a psychic, but they also go to mass. All this sort of borrowing, and it's not even the fact that none of that makes sense together. That's actually not a bug for the remixed, that these things don't actually fit together, because it's about personalizing your religion, about making meaning for you, because, as Burton points out, the larger kind of institutions culturally, civilly, and religiously are being seen by many people to fail to provide meaning and community and purpose. And so people are trying to find it for themselves. And so they make their own. And we're taught that we can make our own because that's what we do with everything in life. She uses remix, and I like to think of it as a playlist. So previously you would have to buy an album. It was an all or nothing purchase, and you listen to all or nothing of the album. It used to be that's how religion and meaning systems were. You had all of it or you had nothing. And now we can make a playlist. I like this song from this album, this song from this album, this song from this album. We do the same thing with religion. We say, I like this practice from this religion, this practice from this religion, this practice from this religion. I make my own personal religious playlist. That's kind of the remixed idea. And because we can do that with our music, we can do that with all the products in our life, all of the bespoke, handcrafted, curated just for you products in our life. We do that with bigger questions and bigger religious questions of meaning. And she looks at how this connects with capitalism and with market factors, and how there are lots of charlatans and lots of people who are using this to make money off people asking deep questions. So she's looking at both why this happens, also the people who are abusing people's questions, but then also how this is not new. There's something new about it with the internet and with the the possibilities that we all have to create our own communities through the internet and to curate our own religious experiences through online communities or through apps or our access to information, all of that is bigger and newer than it was before. But looking historically, she talks about intuitional religions versus institutional religions and how throughout American history there have been these other forms of religion that kind of trust the self and trust our own personal interpretations and personal kind of religious sensibilities, and that those tend to spike at times of institutional failure or institutional distrust. And so she got onto this because witchcraft is the fastest growing religion in the US, but there were other periods where witchcraft seemed to spike. And what was going on there was actually similar in a cultural sense to what's going on now. So it's really fascinating just on a big, sweeping level of what's going on. On individual chapters, she talks about things like the rise of fan culture, and particularly Harry Potter and fan fiction, and how our relationship to sacred texts, or just texts more generally, has changed. It used to be that the book was published and it is what it is. You can't really argue with the ending. But now with the rise of fan culture and fan fiction and the way we think we have ownership of these stories, there are ways that, whether it's in video games or whether it's in books, that fans believe they have the right to demand certain kinds of things from their stories, from their endings. And particularly with J.K. Rowling, what she's done after the books have been released, there are lots of her fans hate her and think they own the stories even more so than she does. Like, these are our stories and she's messing with our stories even though she's the one that created it. Right? So there's something going on that she's seeing in that that's connected with our own sense of being able to create and curate for ourselves, meaning in that we own these stories, and if we don't like the ending, we can write it the way we want. And so the sense that we don't take any story, let alone religious stories or meaning systems or religions themselves, as a package deal, but we can make demands of them to shift to our felt needs, is something that she sees in the culture more broadly. She also talks about wellness and the idea that there's energy and aura and the kind of prosperity gospel kind of stuff where, name it and claim it. If you think it, then it will come true. Or even the idea that what's wrong is you're not thinking correctly. If you get your thoughts in the right order, or if you buy this superfood or this product, then it's going to make your life better. It's going to give you meaning. They sell products on the basis of spiritual significance. The health benefits of many of these wellness products have nothing to do with actual physical health, but it's actually a pathway to significance and meaning, and there's something very religious about some of the health and wellness culture. And she points out that health and wellness is like a $4.2 trillion business. So the idea that people are seeking spiritual significance through their oils and through their products and through their soul cycle and all those sorts of things, people are finding a way to market it and to make a lot of money off of it, which is its own problem. But then she talks about kind of the other side of this. You've got some of the very positive, maybe not good, but at least positive feeling of this positive thinking and wellness and new thought and all of that. But then you also have the rise of witchcraft, and witchcraft not even as a religion in the traditional sense, because that's a very modern invention and pulling together all sorts of things, but as a means of resistance. She talks about the reasons for the growth of witchcraft and Wicca and the occult, and how it's tied to a certain anti-institutionalism, a certain desire for meaning, but also to tear things down. Its transgressive power is part of its appeal. So whether it's the patriarchy, or whether it's Christianity, or whether it's the institution is the problem, then witchcraft and the occult becomes appealing as a way of being anti-institutional and yet providing religious meaning. But with all of this, she says it all is, whether we like it or not, connected with sex. And so talking about the sexual practices, particularly, say, polyamory, that were at one point very, very fringe, are now becoming more mainstream and more accepted, such that she said 5% of people in the United States identify as polyamorous, and 20% have had some sort of polyamorous relationship, and over 25% believe that's acceptable, which, 20% of America's 330 million people, that's a lot of people. Like, this is maybe seems fringe, but this is not as fringe as you think, and it's coming. And so talking about how that is tied in with all of this, the sexuality and sex are intertwined with religion in these new religious forms. And then she talks about two main forms, main gospels, she says, for this new godless world. And she talks about it in this way because they're the ones that provide the biggest sense of a full system of cohesive meaning. So she talks about the social justice movement, and she talks about techno-utopianism. So you have social justice movement, the feelings are the most important, lived experience, the idea that people are blank slates and that society puts them in boxes, or it labels them and oppresses them, and that what we need to do is to kind of remove those restraints, remove that oppression, and then we will actually have heaven on earth in some sense, right? There's a whole system. She goes into a lot more detail than I am right now. The other side is the techno-utopianism, which is the sense that our bodies aren't good, and we want to kind of transcend ourselves, whether through rational thinking or even through artificial intelligence and hacking our minds in order to be optimized and perfected. The idea that we could transform ourselves to be either more perfect or almost even beyond human, that human limits are bad and that we need to get beyond them. She kind of calls us the Californian ideology because it's rooted in Silicon Valley, and we hold it all in our hands through our smartphones, through all the apps, and the kind of broader cultural sense of what life is all about. And so those are kind of the two main that she says are vying for this place of the civil religion of America. But then she says that there's another. That there's what she calls new atavism, which is a more right-wing reactionary. So if the techno-utopians say our bodies are bad, we need to transcend them. If the social justice say our bodies are blank slates and they're very changeable and mutable, both those talk about treat our bodies as very changeable, as very transformable in some sense. The new atavists are very rooted in DNA, in biology, in a very nihilistic and Nietzschean, Darwinian kind of worldview that sees the biological differences and the racial differences often as being very deeply rooted in DNA and in who we are and immutable, and it's also very fatalistic and often kind of as a nihilistic. So there's the mashup of Jordan Peterson, who has a bit of this new atavistic, but also mixes it with self-help. So his response is, be a man, stand up straight, clean your room. Like, that's his response to this sort of what he calls the breakdown of society. And men are men, women are women. The new atavists, there's a sense of loss of an old age when men knew how to be men and women knew how to be women, and everybody knew their place, and that's been lost, and they're trying to come back to that. And some actually think you can come back, and some don't think you can. And those who don't think you can, you see the rise of these radicalized shooters, domestic terrorists, kind of this, all of that is rooted in this despair that's part of much of that movement. So it's really fascinating as a book. And it's fascinating, but it's not particularly hopeful. And it's not supposed to be. So if you want to think of how to respond, that's a really good question. How would the church, how would Christians respond to this current situation? You're not going to find that in this book, because that's not what it's doing. But it will raise the questions of what's going on now, such that we need to figure out what does it look like to respond with the hope of the gospel. But she does name some common threads that run through all of these religions, or these new religions for a godless world. First is that there's an anti-institutionalism that runs through right, left, center, as far as these new religions distrust institutions, distrust institutional religion. The second is that it's a this-worldly spirituality. And so the hope and the perfection or the transformation or the eschatology is for this world and this world only. So whether it's a restoration of an old order, whether that's paleo or Roman or 1950s or Victorian or medieval, the Middle Ages, whatever, for the atavists, or it's a new world where everyone's free to be who they want to be, or it's a transcendence of human limitations and infinite potential. All of that is this worldly. And so those two common threads, I think, could give us some initial places to think about responding as the church to this. So again, the book is Strange Rites, New Religions for a Godless World by Tara Isabella Burton. I think it's a fascinating book. It's one I'll be thinking about for quite a while. And so if you're interested, please feel free to pick it up. Thank you for watching today. If you like my thoughts about theology, you might like some of my writing. I have two books. One, Our Only Comfort, which is a series of daily devotions, and I have a new book, Rooted, Growing in Christ in a Rootless Age, which comes out June 7th. So there'll be links to both of those in the description. If you would like me to read and review a book, please let me know in the comments, and I'll try to get to that and put that up on the channel. And please take some time to like and subscribe to this video and hit the notification button so that you can be updated on all further reviews. And thank you so much for your time.